All right. Last time we looked at Jewish history, we were during the reign of the Persians. Then Alexander the Great swept across this region, took it over, and then separated the land under different generals because of his passing and having no heir. So this initiates the Greek period in Jewish history, and this is kind of a period of trouble for Jewish people, at least especially around Jerusalem. So the first family to rule are the Ptolemies, and then it's taken over by the Seleucids. And the Seleucids have one leader in particular, a guy named Antiochus the Fourth. And Antiochus is somebody who really is pushing for a universal view of Hellenization. In other words, he really takes issue with the Jewish religion, and he wants to force all his subjects to follow, giving sacrifices to the Greek gods, and in fact, outlawing aspects of the Jewish religion. Now, we have to be clear here. Not all the Jewish people were, put off by this act. In fact, there's plenty of, from what we could tell from the sources, plenty of Hellenized Jews that were ready to go with the flow. However, there was one family in particular, started off with a guy named Matthias, who is actually going to kill one of the figures that was going to try to do this sacrifice of swine on the altar. And this sets off a guerrilla war campaign for the next few years. The family, specifically Judas, one of his sons, will be known as the Maccabees. And in fact, in some of the writings in the intertestamental period, as it's called, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are four books known as the four books of the Maccabees that give this account. It's probably most famous for giving us the holiday of Hanukkah, which just means dedication, because that's what was happening. They were dedicating the temple in this 8-day festival, because the temple had been there was sacrilege done in the temple by the Hellenized Jewish figures and leadership. So so this is one of the big moments in Jewish history. In fact, it's so famous, you get an account from the Roman historian Tacitus many years later. He actually writes this. He says, King Antiochus strove to destroy the national superstition and to introduce Greek civilization, aiming to improve this vilest of nations. So here you have a Roman historian basically putting down the Jews for their superstition against this Hellenistic campaign by Antiochus. So I think this is a very important period, because you start to see Jewish history in outside sources. So we get, not the rosiest picture from Greek leadership. This includes even the Ptolemies in Egypt. You also get a negative depiction of them by Romans, and so there's a number of issues with the Jewish community among Roman sources. So, following the Maccabean period, the last of the sons, a guy named Simon, takes over as both priest and king. This is not totally in line with the way things have always been done. So some people see this as kind of a pretend dynasty, this Hasmonean dynasty, because the Maccabees, they have no direct line into the priestly line, and so there's this is viewed with suspicion. Um, there is a certain autonomy in Jerusalem over the Hasmonean dynasty, but for what we could tell, the Hasmoneans were pretty Hellenized. So for all the Maccabees, revolt, the Jewish leadership was still very Hellenized. Um, Finally, the Hasmonean dynasty falls when the Romans come marching in under Pompey around 63 BC. And eventually, following this time period, you'll get the installation of Herod the Great as the king of the Jewish people. Now, this was trouble at the start. Herod himself is has no line. He's Idumean, and even though he converted Judaism, and in fact, he marries into the Hasmonean dynasty. He marries um, one of the granddaughters of one of the Hasmonean kings, and then consequently, he subsequently puts her and anybody else left in the dynasty to death. So Herod rules. He is in control of the throne, and he's most famous for being a great builder. He basically builds up Judea at a point that no other king has done. He also builds up the port city of Caesarea, obviously named after the Roman emperor, and even rebuilds Samaria. So obviously Herod is he recognizing who's giving him his rule in a lot of this. Well, when he dies, there is no um, competent heir to the throne. I mean, he does hand it off to his sons, and they basically do such a poor job that Rome steps in. Rome stepping in really irritates the Jewish people in general, even though you do have probably landowners and the upper class people in Jerusalem okay with Roman rule because they have a certain sense of social political power. But the average person is upset at Rome's direct power, and things start going bad when there is an incident around Caesarea where poultry is sacrificed in a synagogue. So this sets off a chain reaction that ends up in Jerusalem revolt, but it corresponds around the time period where Emperor Nero is assassinated, and Vespasian, who was already leading the attack against Jerusalem, hands it off to Titus. And Titus will see the destruction of Jerusalem through. By AD 70, Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed. It's a horrific account, and you can see in the video I posted and read about from the Jewish historian Josephus. Now, Josephus is interesting because he actually is witnessing firsthand, goes to the Roman side in the middle of the fight, and talks about the internal divisions that led to the fall of Jerusalem. So he actually puts more of the blame on Jewish dissension. Later on, those that survived this destruction, there's a massive suicide of these Jewish zealots at the Hell Fortress of Masada in 73 A.D. Not to be outdone, there is one more attempt in around 135 A.D. This was in response to Emperor Hadrian wanting to again try to force worship of the gods on the Jewish people. This leads to a Messiah figure being promoted, and at first they kind of get the surprise on the Romans, so the Romans kind of get back, reevaluate the situation, and then attack the the Jewish people, um, and utterly defeat them at Batar. Um, so what happens here is the kind of the end of any type of attempt of social political existence of a Jewish state after this point. Um, Hadrian, the Roman emperor, renames this area Syria Palestina, which is named after the Philistines. So Rome is just done with the Jewish people at this point. And a few centuries later, Christianity would be existing, and Christianity has a very difficult relationship with the uh, the the Jewish community, but it doesn't advocate erasing it, at least at this point. In fact, you'll see some of the church fathers talk about the Jewish community as a sign of those that rebel against God, and that God has, in some sense, replaced them with the church. So this kind of sets up some of the negative, even further negative history of anti-Semitism and of anti-Jewish opinion in the medieval period. I mean, frankly, up to recent history. All right, there's a few parties or sects that Josephus talks about that I think are important to note. The first one are the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are actually, I guess, in some ways, the heroes of the Maccabean period. They are the ones who are stressing purity and of following both the Torah and the living tradition of interpretation. They believe in the resurrection, and we could debate and talk about where that idea came from, because the Old Testament doesn't really say much about it. It's kind of alluded to, but they're going to be the one surviving group from the events we just looked at. And so you'll see them basically transform into the rabbinical school, right? Because kings and priests are kind of left in the dust in Jewish history as time goes on, because of political events, and what replaces that in the Jewish community is the rabbi. And so the Pharisees are kind of seen as the origination of that. The Sadducees are that ruling elite during the Roman rule over Jerusalem. They're tied to the temple. They are a conservative landowning aristocracy, and from what history can show us, they seem to be somewhat Hellenized. Not that the Pharisees weren't, but the Pharisees were, pushing for a more pure and true image of, Judaism. So in some ways, they're the ones that were trying to understand what it meant to follow Torah the best as possible, right, to the written law. So this is where, again, like the rabbinical school like builds up on, how do you do the Sabbath correctly, for example. um the next group are the Essenes, and these are basically the apocalyptic group that go live out in the desert and by the Dead Sea. There's a Qumran community of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They believe in this war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. So you kind of have this dualistic view of reality. And they think that God is going to basically usher in the new kingdom, because the rule in Jerusalem is not pure, it's not good, it is bankrupt. And so again, they approach this with kind of apocalyptic viewpoint. Finally, you have the Zealots, which aren't really a group. They're basically dagger men. That's what they're known for, the Sicarii. And so what they were basically mostly young men who are just angry with Roman rule. And Josephus is the one that kind of says, like, yeah, it was these guys that really riled up the crowd and the loudest voices for revolt. But as he noted, and I think everybody looking back at this history notes, there was no way the Jewish revolt was going to work. Rome was just too powerful, and it was a complete disaster, and it changes human history. So that's the four groups. And that's Jewish ancient